This is the history of the Irish in America, coming to you from the Irish Roots Cafe Broadcast Network, one of 3 broadcast series found at www.irishroots.com. I'm Mike OLaughlin, your host. You can reach me at mike@irishroots.com or by mailing to Box 7575, Kansas City, Missouri, 64116, the old-fashioned way. You might also consider phoning in with your comments to 816-256-3360. Let us know some of the history of the Irish in your part of the world. I'm always eager to record another part of our heritage here. You know, 150 years from now, people may really be interested in what we have to say. Well, we've gathered together a group of scholars, authors, and everyday Irish to paint us a picture of the Irish in America. Among today's topics, we're going to be interviewing Dave Lossos, author of a book on the Irish in St. Louis. We spent a lot of episodes already on Kansas City area, and last week I think it was on the Irish wilderness, a little history on that. So today we're going to move on to St. Louis and see what this author has to say. You never know what's going to happen. And this is the last interview that I recorded in the year 2007, so it's time we get it out here before we get too far along in the first month of 2008. And it's going to be interesting. You know, there's always been a little rivalry, it seems, between Kansas City and St. Louis. Maybe that's because St. Louis was established so long before Kansas City in history. But we're going to take a look at it today. This is episode 22, when Dave wrote about the Irish in St. Louis. Hey, and remember to take a look at the Irish Roots Cafe webpage if you get the chance. You can find a book there. You can search for your family tree for free or even become a member. It all goes to keep things rolling in the right direction, and you can surely get there from here. All you got to do is go to www.irishroots.com. And be sure to check the show notes on our blog. We can have some extra links there and some extra information on our interviews each episode, so that might be worth your time if you've got an interest. Now let's take a look at a few notes this week. What's happening at the Irish Roots Cafe? Let's see, our Irish song and recitation broadcast. We're covering our last one. We covered Slieve Namone with Peter Adams singing the finale, as he has for most of the first episodes. That'll be worthwhile listening to, so go on over to that one if you haven't heard it, and all you got to do is sign up on our webpage or click on the play button on our webpage on the podcast section, and the songs will come up for you. We also got Connie Dover coming up with her beautiful voice and songs. She's going to be doing one pretty soon here too. And on our other broadcast, the Irish Families broadcast, we had Kennedy as the name of the week and Galway as the book of the week. And we also announced 5 new genealogy books on Irish family research to come out in February. Those may be my last books. I don't know if I can find another Irish book in me. I think that makes 40 or 50. You lose count after a while. It's been a lot of years. Well, we're going to continue on with at least one broadcast or podcast each week from one of those categories. It may be this one. It may be one of the others. Just be sure to subscribe to all 3, and you'll have something coming through every single week. Now, our book of the week, we're going to include on our blog some quotes from Missouri Irish on St. Louis Irish history. And we're also going to include a link to Dave's book, our author that we're interviewing today. And you'll be able to get to his website, which is helpful for genealogy too. So that'll be worthwhile. And let me see, that reminds me, thank you to all of our members, because without you, these podcasts wouldn't be possible, and we sure look forward to any memberships, and get a book if it looks like something you'd like. It sure helps us out here. Now it's time to sit down and listen to our interview with Dave. And why is that? That's because every day's a holiday at the Irish Roots Cafe. And remember, you can phone 816-256-3360 to leave your order, your family search, or to ask a question that I can answer in the next podcast. You can even play a tune on your fiddle or your flute, and we'll put it on our song podcast. Or you might even do a recitation if it's a good one. We'd sure like to hear it on and hear it all, and we'll put it on the very first chance we get if it fits. So now let's listen in to our interview with Dave. Well, this afternoon we've got a real treat. We're here at the Irish Roots Cafe, and I've been waiting for David A. Lossos. I wonder if that's how you pronounce the name. I'll have to ask him when he comes over here. There he is. Dave, come over here and have a seat at the corner booth and tell me a little bit about your first book. I see it's in the Images of America series, Irish St. Louis. When did you write that book?
That book is about 3 years old now. It was the first book that I did for Arcadia. Had a great time doing it. Learned a lot about the Irish history of St. Louis.
Well, I see that on the front of the book, it's got a picture of Father Tim Dempsey's Irish pipers and the word Fogaballach, or the phrase above them there. And it's interesting to see that the Irish pipers are not wearing kilts because kilts are not Irish, really. Especially tartan. Right. Family tartans aren't Irish, so I was glad to see that.
Yeah, I was so happy to find that particular picture to show the Irish heritage back in that particular era here in St. Louis.
But what era was that for Father Tim Dempsey?
That was the early 19th century. The 20th century, rather. He was quite well known to the Irish community in terms of assisting immigrants at that time and quite active in the community.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that sure caught me. I know you've done a lot of work because I put out a book, way back in 1984 and covered a little bit on St. Louis, Kansas City, the Irish wilderness, and it's hard to dig out some of those photos, that's for sure. What about your own line? Do you have anything that goes back to Ireland in your family history?
Sadly, I have to admit that there's not a drop of Irish in me.
How about some German?
But, however, in my genetic defense, I do have to say that I have 4 grandchildren that all have Irish blood.
Yeah, I saw the picture there in the book, I think it was.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I included my first 3 grandchildren's pictures in there just for that reason, and now I've added a 4th grandchild who also has that heritage.
Well, now, do you have, when you were doing this book, it sort of focused around, you almost took like miniature biographies and divided it up into subject areas and made it real interesting. I was sure glad to see it because you just don't have many books that have ever covered it. How far back did you go? Did you see much, sort of a sidelight there? Did you run into much on the French influence early in St. Louis?
Well, the fact that St. Louis was founded back in 1764 by a Frenchman who was operating under the auspices of the Spanish government, and obviously the English were involved there quite a bit too. It was quite a strange situation. You would think that there would have been more French influence, but didn't turn out that way. But anyway, the Irish influence in St. Louis came about very quickly because a number of the people in my book were born in the mid to late 1700s, and they were around 1800 when the Lewis and Clark expedition took off from St. Louis in 1804.
Well, yeah, that's right. And Kansas City at that point was really yet to be discovered.
Right, yes.
Do you have a particular favorite character out of that whole your whole experience? Did somebody particularly strike you?
Well, to be quite honest with you, the most striking Irishman in St. Louis is a fellow by the name of Father Faraday. He's a Jesuit priest, and I'm sure anybody that's Irish has probably run across his name. He's quite well known here in St. Louis as the local historian. He's published 30-some-odd books. He's a very young, I believe he's only 94.
Good gosh.
Still pumping out books on St. Louis history and other issues also.
And he did one book that was St. Louis Irish, didn't he?
It was entitled The St. Louis Irish, an Unmatched Celtic Community, back in 2001. which I had a copy of when I was commissioned to do this book. And I used his book as my gospel since I had such great respect for him as a historian. And I decided that he had few pictures in his book, and I decided to just give him a call and say, do you have anything left over that I can use? And I figured he'd probably brush me off, but instead he invited me down to his office, and there's probably about a dozen photos in my book that came courtesy of Father Faraday.
Oh, that's great. Boy, it's good to see people working together to make things happen. Too often it's not that way. Now in St. Louis today, do you know, is there an Irish cultural center? What kind of feel do you get from the community there?
I don't know if you could call it a cultural center. There is certainly a cultural flavor of the Irish in St. Louis. There's a number of organizations. Probably the main claim to fame is our Irish parade each year. That's when we get the most notoriety for the Irish. But to be quite honest with you, Irish is here 365 days a year in our pubs and restaurants and cultural events.
Right.
The city of St. Louis.
Now, I can tell you're an expert in the Irish genealogy. You got a web page that's set up just to help people in genealogy in St. Louis, don't you?
Yes, I do. Set that up about 10 years ago. It was something that was noticeably lacking here in St. Louis, and I was into genealogy, and the internet was becoming very popular, so I decided to jump in with both feet, and we have about 10,000 visitors a month now passing through that website. A lot of them coming back because I introduced a thing called the St. Louis Memories, which allows people to send me their childhood memories of growing up in St. Louis, and I publish those. That's obviously the most popular piece of the genealogy in St. Louis website.
Oh, yeah, I bet it brings it alive for everybody, and I bet it brings some of the neighborhoods back to life, too, when people start remembering back.
There's tens of thousands of memories that have been shared now on the internet, on that website, and the common themes, it was like we all grew up in the same household back in the 50s and the 60s. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, it is. I've been doing the same thing here in Kansas City, and it's interesting to see all the comparisons. Have you ever run to many? You probably don't, but you run into any connections between Kansas City and St. Louis?
Actually, no, not that much. And I don't really understand why, but I have not seen that much of a connection for the two most populous and possibly popular cities in the state.
Yeah, I
guess just being at the far ends of each other.
Right, they're like in almost like they're in two different worlds. I had one person in my family in OLaughlin went to St. Louis back a few generations ago, but they dropped the O, so I don't know if we'd be able to find them or not. What about, I saw in there you had somebody trace back, it was really interesting, David O'Killia from Galag, Ireland, and he left in 1652.
Yes, that's my some of my grandchildren's claim to fame. It was one of the first settlers in Plymouth Colony from the Kelly clan. O'Killia was obviously a derivative of the name Kelly, as it turned out, about 3 or 4 generations down the line. But my grandchildren are all descended from that particular Kelly line. It was quite fascinating to have found that. I have another website that I'm also the webmaster of, and that's Plymouth Colony.
Gosh, you found him in the Plymouth Colony in 1655 as an indentured servant, and he went on to get some land, and the descendants are in St. Louis now?
And all over the country, for that matter. That's
sure an interesting story. Do you have any tips to somebody who's trying to research their family that's gone back to St. Louis, and I'm sure they're scattered all over Missouri because St. Louis was the place to go? Is there a particular route to follow when they're trying to research?
St. Louis is a very Catholic town, therefore we had a number of very Irish Catholic parishes, and they're just filled with all kinds of helpful hints for individuals tracing their Irish roots. All of the parish records here in St. Louis are on microfilm and through interlibrary loan. All you need to know is what parish they might have been in. And once again, my website tries to assist people in defining exactly what parish that is, and I can even tell them the actual film numbers of the family history library that their ancestors might be on.
Yeah, we'll put a link to your website on our show notes. That's going to be helpful to a lot of people. I've got two podcasts. One is on Irish families, people searching for Irish all across the country, and the other I just started is on Missouri Irish. So I think we'll do that for both of them, so people know you're out there. You're going to help both sets of people. And how long have you had that website up?
It'll be 10 years in October.
Boy, yeah, you're one of the early ones then. It's got to be a good one. Did you ever run into, I was looking through all the cast of characters in your book, and there's only one I didn't find that I was hoping I might see some more on. I think probably because other people have written on it, but Joseph Murphy, the guy who did the Murphy wagon out of St. Louis. Did you ever run onto him?
Since it's a pictorial book, my criteria was if I couldn't find a photo, they didn't get in the book. So,
boy, I tell you, you did a good job of finding photos too. I was so happy to see those because I had written a little bit about some of these folks, but didn't have the photos. Either couldn't find them or didn't have the time, which I'm sure you know how long it can take to find some of these things. Did you use
I was fortunate to get a hold of a guy by the name of Joe McGlynn, who was the founder of the Irish parade back 30 some odd years ago.
Right.
And he's still around and doing his thing. And he invited me to his home. I was just overwhelmed with the number of photos hanging on his wall. Prime Ministers of Ireland, CEO of Aer Lingus, many dignitaries. Everybody that's passed through St. Louis, I think, knows Joe McGlynn. He had just, I could have written a book just on the pictures on his walls.
Well, I bet. Yeah, McGlynn's sort of a name that's pretty well known in St. Louis. I know back from when, from 30, 40 years ago when I was trying to do my work, it kept coming up. Any other things that generally struck you as you wrote this book or finished your book? Did anything just sort of occur to you? Like, did you see the Irish excelling at any particular profession, or did they have any tendencies that you noticed?
No, that was the one thing that made it tough for me to try and categorize the chapters that I was going to have in my book, because it ran the gamut of professionals, politics, clergy, arts. There was no limit as to what I could see was the influence of the early Irish and the current Irish.
I see that you noted that the Irish didn't all just come in during the famine, which was about 1845 to 1850. There was a lot there earlier, and that's sure where you started in the book. I noticed you had Joseph Charles there was the first picture I saw.
Back in 1808, I think he started the first newspaper west of the Mississippi.
That's right, and there were several Irishmen involved in starting the second newspaper west of the Mississippi, we in St. Louis, and I'm sure it was the opposite political persuasion. And the first paper in Kansas City was started in the town of Kansas by Robert Kennedy. So there's a little theme there I've found, at least looking around it, that a lot of people ended up in the communications and newspaper business.
Yeah.
What are your projects today? What are you mainly interested in?
I'm concentrating strictly on the genealogy and
fair.
then I put together one called St. Louis Then and Now, which details pictures from about 100 years ago, and then sometimes the buildings were there, sometimes they weren't. But
right. Good. Gosh. Well, that's pretty good. You sure have a lot of knowledge about the St. Louis history. Have you run onto any groups that are specifically devoted to researching Irish families in the St. Louis area?
There's a few Irish notables here in St. Louis that are definitely inclined toward the Irish. One or two websites noteworthy, and all of those links can be found on my Genealogy in St. Louis website. Good.
That's where we'll send folks to go if they want to take a step closer to doing their research there. Well, it's been good having you here at the cafe today, David. Are there any closing comments that you'd like to make? We're going out on the internet to the whole world. We've got Australia, England, Canada, the U.S., so I'm sure if there's anything you want to get out there, we can sure do it now. Boy, I tell you, it sounds like you inherited some Irish DNA just from writing this book. Well, thanks again for the interview, David. I'll be talking to you in the future, and I'll sure be sending anybody your way that needs to get with researching the Irish in St. Louis.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Now, remember to send your books, sing your songs, play your tunes, or send your family search to me here by email or by mail. at our American address at the Irish Roots Cafe, Box 7575, Kansas City, Missouri 64116. And report on things in your part of the world or leave your notes on my phone recorder, like I said, at 816-256-3360. And you can always Skype me at Mick the Bridge. That's MICKTHEBRIDGE. Can you hear that whistle blowing, folks? That's all, folks. Until next time, we meet right here, right where Ireland met America, at the Irish Roots Cafe.